It was difficult for me psychologically to do it. I got drunk to play the scene.
Jane Fonda is one of the most respected actresses alive, but there's one film she wishes everyone would forget: Barbarella. We're not just talking about the strange plot. We're revealing the on-set nightmare of her infamous costumes. You see, these outfits were practically designed to fail, constantly tearing and falling off, leaving her feeling utterly humiliated. But the thing nobody tells you is how this entire disaster was engineered by her own husband, director Roger Vadim, leading to a moment Fonda still hates: plastic, metal, and a whole lot of tape. The year was 1967, and Jane Fonda was on a soundstage in Rome, about to film the most iconic scene of her career, and, to put it mildly, the most humiliating. The scene was the opening title sequence for Barbarella. The plan? Fonda, as the titular hero, would perform a zero-gravity striptease, floating weightlessly in her fur-lined spaceship as the credits rolled. It was meant to be alluring, futuristic, and groundbreaking. The reality? It was a technical and personal nightmare. Fonda was suspended by thin wires and fishing lines, which were incredibly painful. But the real enemy was the costume itself, or rather, the lack of one. You see, to create the floating effect, pieces of her spacesuit were attached to a large pane of glass she was pressed against, which would be rotated by crew members. But the costume pieces, barely held on, kept slipping. The material wouldn't cooperate. The illusion was failing, and Fonda was left feeling like a puppet on a string, completely exposed. This single scene was a perfect summary of her entire experience. The wardrobes for Barbarella weren't clothes, they were contraptions, and they were all failing. The man behind these creations was the avant-garde designer Paco Rabanne. Rabanne was famous in the 1960s for his unwearable fashion. He didn't use fabric, he used chainmail, aluminum plates, and rhodoid plastic discs. His outfits were sculptures, meant to be looked at, not worn. And they were definitely not meant for a film set where an actress had to run, jump, and fight. What many overlooked is that these materials were brutal. The plastic was sharp and would cut into Fonda's skin. The metal was freezing cold under the hot studio lights. And the biggest issue? They had no give. None. There was no stretch. No flexibility. If Fonda moved her arm too quickly, a plastic panel would snap. If she bent over, a chain link would pop. The entire wardrobe was a malfunction waiting to happen. And it happened. Constantly. Sources from the set describe a near-constant battle to keep Fonda covered. Her most famous outfit, the green leotard with the clear plastic breastplate, was notorious. It was held together by little more than thin straps and double-sided tape. In scenes with any action, the tape would lose its grip, and the top would begin to fall off. Crew members would have to rush in between takes to literally tape her back into the costume. For Fonda, this was beyond frustrating. It was humiliating. She was a serious actress, trained at the legendary Actors Studio, and here she was, reduced to fighting with a piece of plastic that wouldn't stay put. The director, Roger Vadim, who also happened to be her husband, didn't seem to mind. In fact, many believe he encouraged it. Vadim's entire career was built on pushing boundaries and creating provocative images of his wives and girlfriends. He had done it with Brigitte Bardot. Now, it was Jane's turn. He wanted Barbarella to be a sensual spectacle, and if the costume accidentally slipped, that just added to the allure. Imagine the feeling, dangling from wires, your costume falling apart, and your own husband, the director, just keeps the cameras rolling. This is the core of why Fonda hates it. It wasn't an oops moment. It was a symbol of her complete lack of power on that set. She felt objectified, but the failing wardrobe was just one piece of a much larger puzzle of chaos. Lost in translation. The thing is, the Barbarella set was a total circus from day one. The production was based in Rome, at the famous De Laurentiis studios, and it was a massive, expensive, and deeply troubled shoot. The root of the problem wasn't just the finicky costumes. It was a perfect storm of clashing egos, technical failures, and a massive language barrier. At the center of it all was director Roger Vadim. Vadim was a French filmmaker with a huge reputation, not necessarily for making great films, but for discovering beautiful women. He lived a life of glamour and scandal, and Barbarella was his passion project. He saw it as a modern, pop art fairy tale, but his vision was messy. He was constantly rewriting the script, sometimes handing Fonda new pages just minutes before they were set to film. This brings up the big question: why was Jane Fonda even there? By this point, she wasn't some unknown. She was Hollywood royalty, the daughter of the legendary Henry Fonda. She had studied under the master Lee Strasberg. She was building a career in serious films. A risque, campy sci-fi movie seemed completely off-brand. The answer, in her own words, was simple. She was in love. She was married to Vadim, and at that time she was still trying to be the woman he wanted her to be. If he wanted her to be a space vixen, she would try. But the reality of the shoot was brutal. You see, the set was a Tower of Babel. Vadim was French and spoke to Fonda in French. The producer, Dino De Laurentiis, was Italian. The crew was almost entirely Italian, speaking very little English. And Fonda, of course, was American. Communication was a complete disaster. Imagine Fonda, already stressed and in a costume that's digging into her skin, trying to explain a problem. She'd speak in English to an assistant, who would try to translate it to an Italian crew member, who would then have to get approval from Vadim in French. It was impossible. Simple requests took hours. Complex problems, like figuring out how to make the excessive machine look convincing, became week-long ordeals. This chaos directly impacted the wardrobe. When a costume broke, which it did, every single day, there wasn't a quick fix. The on-set wardrobe team, mostly Italian, had never worked with Paco Rabanne's bizarre materials. They were trying to patch up snapped plastic with glue and sew metal plates back together. It was a losing battle. Fonda felt completely isolated. She later admitted she was deeply unhappy during the entire shoot. She was drinking heavily just to get through the days. She felt trapped in a foreign country, in a failing marriage, and in a costume that was literally falling to pieces around her. The malfunctions weren't just embarrassing. They were a constant physical reminder of how little control she had over her own life and career at that moment. What many overlooked was that this film wasn't just a job for her. It was the breaking point of her marriage and her old identity. This role was a sharp turn from the serious career she was trying to build. Betraying the family name. To understand why Barbarella and its failing costumes hit Jane Fonda so hard, you have to understand where she came from. She wasn't just any actress. She was a Fonda. Her father was Henry Fonda, one of the most beloved actors in American history. He was the face of integrity, the star of The Grapes of Wrath and 12 Angry Men. He represented American ideals, and Jane grew up in the shadow of this legend. But the thing nobody tells you is that her childhood was far from a Hollywood fairy tale. It was a story of immense pressure and deep private tragedy. Her father was emotionally cold and distant. He was obsessed with perfection and was brutally critical of his children. Jane grew up desperately trying to win his approval, an approval that never came. The real darkness, however, came from her mother, Frances Ford Seymour. When Jane was just 12 years old, her mother, who battled severe mental health issues, tragically took her own life. The family, in a devastating move, lied to Jane and her brother Peter, telling them she had passed from a heart attack. Jane only learned the truth months later by reading about it in a movie magazine. This trauma shaped everything about her. It fueled a deep-seated insecurity and a powerful lifelong need to be perfect. She entered acting not just because it was the family business, but because she was searching for an identity and for the validation her father never gave her. She threw herself into becoming a serious actress. She moved to New York and joined the Actors Studio, studying the method under Lee Strasberg. Her early roles were in dramas and comedies that, while not all great, were respectable. She was building a reputation for her talent and her work ethic, proving she was more than just Henry Fonda's daughter. And then, Barbarella happened. This movie and that costume represented a complete betrayal of everything she was trying to be. It wasn't serious. It wasn't about the method. It was, in her eyes, purely about how she looked in a skimpy, futuristic outfit. When that outfit would snap and fall off, it wasn't just an embarrassing moment. It was a physical manifestation of her deepest fears, that she wasn't a real actress, that she was just an object, that she was failing. She later said she only did the film to please Vadim. She was still in a phase of her life where she let men define her. Vadim wanted a provocative pinup, so she tried to be one, but it went against every serious instinct she had. The constant wardrobe malfunctions were, to her, proof that this was all a terrible mistake. She felt she was letting her father down, letting Lee Strasberg down, and letting herself down. The humiliation of those moments on set, scrambling to cover herself while the crew looked on, stuck with her for decades. It was the exact opposite of the strong, in-control artist she so desperately wanted to be. But the film's release didn't end the story. It just created a new problem. Living with the legend. When Barbarella was finally released in 1968, it was not the blockbuster smash the studio hoped for. In the United States, it was a box office disappointment. Critics were baffled. They didn't know what to make of it. Was it a brilliant piece of pop art, or was it just expensive, nonsensical trash? For Jane Fonda, it was a professional low point. She wanted the film and its humiliating costumes to just disappear. The thing is, Barbarella didn't disappear. It found a new life. Throughout the 1970s, it became a massive cult classic. College campuses played it at midnight showings. Audiences began to appreciate its wild, psychedelic visuals, its campy humor, and its bizarre, over-the-top nature. The very things that made it a critical failure at first are what made it an icon. And at the center of that icon status, Jane Fonda and her absurdly provocative, barely there costumes. And here is the great, stunning irony of Jane Fonda's life. Just as Barbarella was being rediscovered as a camp masterpiece, Jane Fonda was reinventing herself. She had divorced Roger Vadim. She cut her hair, stopped trying to be perfect, and found her true voice. She became one of the most powerful and controversial political activists of her generation. She traveled to Vietnam, earning the infamous nickname Hanoi Jane. She became a leading voice in the feminist movement, fighting for women's rights. She also started producing her own films, focusing on serious, important stories. In the 1970s, she won 2 Academy Awards for Best Actress. She was, by all accounts, one of the most serious, respected, and politically active women in America. And yet, the image of Barbarella haunted her. Her political opponents loved to use it against her. How could anyone take this woman's political opinions seriously? She was the space girl who did a zero-gravity striptease. They would print photos of her in the falling-off costumes right next to her serious political speeches, trying to paint her as a hypocrite or a bimbo. The image she hated, the one that made her feel so powerless, was now being actively used as a weapon to silence her. For decades, Fonda has had to live with this bizarre contradiction. She acknowledges that, for better or worse, the film is iconic. But her personal feelings about the experience, and especially about that wardrobe, have never softened. She still speaks of it with a mix of embarrassment and anger. That wardrobe malfunction wasn't just a silly on-set mishap. It was a moment of deep humiliation that represented a time in her life when she felt she had no voice and no power. A time she was defined by a plastic costume that wouldn't even stay on. Was it all just a product of its time, or was it something more? We're left looking at this story, wondering if this was just a campy, accidental moment, or if it was pure exploitation from the very start. So what do you think? Was Barbarella just a campy movie mishap, or was it pure exploitation from the start? Let us know below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.